International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
A child has an immense capacity to believe. It has almost like a blank slate, a tabula rasa as they call it, an open slate on which you can write and engrave the content and the extent to which this child can believe. That's why you learn more about life by watching a child than you will ever learn about life by reading philosophy textbooks.
Some people seem to spend their lives hiding from real life. One of the most prominent men in the Bible did exactly that. Through his story, we can learn how to face reality and teach future generations to do the same. Hello and welcome to Let My People Think with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. This week and next, Ravi is looking at the life of Jacob. He became one of the most famous men in history, but he did not start very well. His upbringing led to many problems. He lied, cheated, ran away from problems, and was tricked into 14 years of hard labor before he had an encounter with God that reshaped him. What happened? Let's listen in as Ravi begins his message, Raised to Run.
Genesis 25, reading from verse 19. This is the account of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. I wish it were always as simple as that. It doesn't always happen that way. Remember, a historic motif is in the process of being developed here. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. Please notice he doesn't say 2 fetuses or chemical substances are in your womb. 2 nations are in your womb. And 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. I have entitled this message, Raised to Run, because I see in Jacob all of the ingredients poured into his young life that made him flee for the better part of his life. A baby is a very, very fragile entity. A young life, a very, very fragile entity. I often wonder if our human beings today, who in the name of humanism are literally aborting millions of babies, if we will ever know in this world the lives we have snuffed out and the great possibilities that we could have had as realities that have been extinguished because of human self-centeredness. Because the Bible sees 2 babies in their mother's womb, and God says 2 nations are in your womb. If God can see the end from the beginning, and see all of the potentiality and the actuality woven together in this life. And now we, with all of our technological developments, are snuffing these potentialities out so that there is no actuality left for millions of them. I don't know whether we can ever explain what we are doing to humankind. A human being is a distinctive entity created in the image of God, a unique entity. That's why I think we are all so different. Nobody a duplicate of the other, so that when our praise corporately unifies to be sent towards God in our personalities and in our service to Him, it is not a kind of a voice of unison rising up, but there's a massive symphony rising up before God, because there is a complementariness in our lives, one towards the other. One of my favorite authors is an Englishman by the name of F.W. Borum. I believe he died in either 1959 or 1960. He spent most of his life ministering in Australia and New Zealand. When Billy Graham went to Australia in the early part of 1959, when he stepped down from the plane, the man who came to receive him, Billy Graham said to him, "If there's one man I want to see before I leave, it's F.W. Borum." And I remember when I quoted one of F.W. Borum's quotes in my message at Amsterdam, Mrs. Graham came over to my wife and said to her, "Your husband quoted one of my favorite authors of all time. This man has written over 50 books of essays, one of the most distinguished writers of this century. And if you can ever get a hold of any of his books in used bookstores, buy it. And if you don't want to keep it, send it to me. I'll be glad to pay you a reasonable price for what you bought it for." Brilliant writer. He has an essay called The Sword of Solomon. Listen to what he says here. "Great was the wisdom of Solomon, for he demonstrated one day, more vividly and dramatically than it had ever been demonstrated before, the utter unreliability of mathematics on the higher planes of human experience. There is a sense, I suppose, in which twice one are two, a sense in which 2 and 2 are 4, a sense in which many other propositions of this kind are partly, if not wholly, true. It is difficult to see how merchants and accountants and other excellent and well-meaning people could go back to their desks and counting houses if their faith in these arithmetical conclusions was seriously shaken. I hasten to say, therefore, that there is a plane of ledgers and cash books on which these propositions are approximately sound. But if you rise from that plane to a loftier one, you will find at once that they are completely untenable. They simply will not work. Solomon proves it at the city gate once and for all. It may be true that half a sovereign and half a sovereign make one sovereign. It is obviously untrue that half a baby and half a baby make one baby. Let the sword do its deadly work. Let it cleave this baby into two parts, and half a baby plus half a baby will represent but the grim and gruesome mockery of a child. Two halves of a baby make no baby at all. On this higher plane of human sentiment and experience, the laws of mathematics collapse completely. When, for example, a man distributes his wealth among his children, he gives to each a part. But when a woman distributes her love among her children, she gives it all to each of them. I do not believe that any man who has once fallen in love will ever be persuaded that 1 and 1 are only 2. He looks at her and he feels that 1 plus 1 would be 1,000,000. I do not believe that any happy couple, into the sweet shelter of whose home a little child has come, will ever be convinced that 2 and 1 are only 3. Life has been enriched 1,000-fold by the addition of that one little life to theirs, and I am certain that no pair from whose clinging and protecting arms their treasure has been snatched will find comfort in the assurance that 1 from 3 leaves 2. In the great crises of life, one's faith in figures breaks down hopelessly. In the great crisis of life, one's faith in figures breaks down hopelessly. You see, there is a whole world locked in to a little child. And there are at least 2 reasons for that, apart from the fact that a child is created in the image of God. Listen to me carefully now. A child has an immense capacity to believe. It has almost like a blank slate, a tabula rasa as they call it, an open slate on which you can write and engrave the content and the extent to which this child can believe. That's why you learn more about life by watching a child than you will ever learn about life by reading philosophy textbooks. Nathan was one day playing with a balloon in the living room, a helium balloon, and he would let it go. It would go to the ceiling. He enjoyed that. Then he'd step on top of the sofa and pull it down. He liked it, so he did it again. Let the balloon go. It would go to the ceiling, step on top of the sofa, hold the string, pull it down. He did that probably 20, 30 times. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. G.K. Chesterton had said, part of God's infinite beauty is manifested in a little child in their immense capacity to exult in the monotonous. What does the child say? When you pick him up and throw him in the air, do it again. Pick him up and throw him in the air, do it again. And he thinks these hands can just keep on doing it again. The Lord says to the sun every morning, do it again. God says to the moon every night, do it again. In that repetitive action of God, he's able to exult in it. And Nathan was having a great time, sending it to the ceiling, jumping on the sofa, pulling it down. Now he was going to try something new, so he stepped outside the house. And he went into the front yard and let that balloon go. All of a sudden, he watched it disappear into the sky. He paused and recognized there was no sofa in the house big enough to pull it down. And he broke into uncontrollable sobs as if the millennium had been cancelled. And as I walked out of the house, I saw him crying, looking at that balloon. And as he saw me coming out and saw me looking at the balloon, he looked at my face, suddenly clapped his hands and said, I know what, Daddy, next time you're in the plane, you can bring it back for me. That capacity of wonder, that capacity of belief. But not only is there that capacity of believing and the capacity of wonder, there is also the capacity to have an impact and have effect on people. I have known men of great power and wealth who have come to Christ because of their grandchildren. Some years ago, I think it was 1977, our oldest little girl, Sarah, was not even 2. And we were crossing over from Jordan over the West Bank into Israel. And I was told I could be there all day because they'd examined my passport, quizzed me on all kinds of things, all of the countries I'd been in that year, and on and on and on. And security was very, very heavy. As a matter of fact, the Jordanian porter could only bring your bags halfway to the Allenby Bridge, and then he had to leave. The Israeli porter would come halfway to the Allenby Bridge, pick your bags up, and take you into Israeli territory. And so Sarah, Margie, and I, we were on a 15-country tour, traveling for 48 weeks. We were getting weary. And now Sarah was about to be, for the first time, surrounded by machine gun-toting soldiers. And we walked into that immigration hall, and all around us, Israeli soldiers, machine guns in their hands. There was a tremendous sense of somberness right there. I didn't know how much to tell her or not to tell her. I decided not to say anything. I was answering questions to the immigration officer when my turn came. Unknown to me, she had locked her gaze on one of the Israeli soldiers there. They were having a staring contest. All of a sudden, when there was a pin drop silence in the whole room, her squeaky voice spoke up and said this to him, "Excuse me, sir, do you have any bubble gum?" You know, it was as if the war stood still for 1 minute, and she has a lovely olive complexion. And I don't know whether this soldier thought of his children back home or what, but everyone was looking in his direction. And this young, sturdy-looking, mustachioed Israeli soldier looked towards one of his other comrades there, and then he took his machine gun, placed it on a table, went over to Sarah, kneeled down, picked her up, took her away into a back room, came out about 2 or 3 minutes later with his arm around her, one arm around her, his left hand holding a tray with 3 glasses of lemonade, one for her, one for my wife, and one for myself. We were in and out of there in 25 minutes. He put us in his Jeep and drove us to the taxi stand. Sarah earned her keep for the whole year by that one question. The power of a little child. Now, from the context again, you cannot divide a human being like you divide a quantity. A slice of bread is a quantity. A human being is an entity. You cannot mangle the human being and still keep them distinctively human. Number two, the child has an immense capacity for faith and belief, and you engrave that teaching upon their hearts and their consciences. Number three, they have a tremendous capacity to have an impact on those around them. If all that is true and virtually beyond debate, please notice the mistakes that were made in this household, and that's why Jacob spent most of his life running. Mistake number one, there was a favoritism being played in the household where the mother favored him and the father favored Esau. Because Esau was a man about the open country, Jacob was a homebody, highly domesticated, and the mother loved him, the father loved the hunter in Esau. They tried to do what Solomon said could never be done. You cannot put a sword between a human being and tear them apart. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more than one way to put a sword through a heart. You don't have to literally do that. You can emotionally mangle and mar an individual. I want you to know that as influential as many of us may be today, we may be carrying scars for most of our adult life because of the way we were brought up. It is vitally important what your children hear you saying to them. It is vitally important how your children hear you speaking to each other. You hear almost any testimony. You hear almost any testimony anywhere where a life has been messed up, and somewhere behind the recesses of that mind you will hear somebody say, in my childhood, rightly or wrongly, I felt rejected, or I felt mangled, or somehow I felt I was hurt. And I want to be very careful with what I say because this can be overstated. But I know because of the kind of culture in which I was raised, people were not very expressive. I don't ever recall my father, as good a man as he was in so many ways, prior to his conversion, which was later in life, my father never ever put his arm around me and said to me, Ravi, I love you. I never heard him say that. In fact, the most I ever felt him embrace me was when my mother died. Now, I'm not finding fault. Please don't misunderstand me. And I don't think even for a solitary moment my dad would have intended to deplete my personality by virtue of that non-verbalization of his feelings. But you know, gentlemen, we can be thoroughly hypocritical. And if I had the risk of being so frank with you, I think I would be honest enough to say to you, it is at least about a dozen or 20 times a week or more that I'll feel my wife's arms around me and saying to me, I really love you. And many times saying to me, I love to hear you say, I love you. We men are too proud to admit that. We are too proud to tell the world that we long to feel those arms around us, that we long to hear the words, I love you. And right from the time we are children, we need desperately that belongingness. How would you feel if you knew you had a brother whom your father preferred to you, or you had a brother or a sister that your mother preferred to you? There was a mangling process that went on, and maybe it's about time, if some of us have not yet learned to be communicative of this affection to our children, that we ask ourselves why that is so. Jacob was raised, and I'm not saying any intention was obviously present. The fact of the matter is, it is clearly stated, one loved the other loved the other son, and there was a gradual tearing apart between the two of them. There was a second mistake made in that home. There was no clear communication. I have deduced this from at least two rather remote statements. In Genesis chapter 26 and verse 34, we are told that Esau married a heathen woman. In Genesis chapter 28, we are told how Rebekah told Jacob to leave home and go and find a wife from amongst his own people because of the purity of their religious worship. She did not want him marrying a heathen partner. And then these rather sudden words Then Esau found out how much he had hurt his parents by marrying a heathen woman. Then he realized that. But now it's too late. And again I say to you, particularly in certain cultures, you see, I was raised in a culture where nobody ever told me about certain things about human sexuality and marriage. Even to the very day I was married, nobody of an adult age from my culture sat down and said to me, look, I want to talk to you about what marriage is all about, how to relate to your wife, how to truly love a woman to whom you have pledged yourself. Nobody ever talked to me about this. Now, the reason they didn't was very definite, and that was this. I was raised in a culture where there was a univocity of feeling. The whole culture believed in a moral uprightness to a certain extent. I would never have dreamed of an illicit relationship with someone else. I knew that by the force of culture. I knew it would be wrong. And many of the things I gleaned almost subliminally came into my mind because the culture believed that. That is no longer true in any culture in the world because the force of television is teaching our children all the wrong things. It is imperative, therefore, that we clearly communicate to our children in precepts that they understand. As I look at this home, I'm not sure with what specificity these issues were addressed. There was a favoritism resulting in mangling. There was no communication resulting in false signals. And thirdly, there was deception practiced in the household, and therefore it was imitated by the children. Remember the time Isaac lied about his wife and said, she's not my wife, she's my sister? Where do you think he got that from? He got that from his father. And now Rebekah is telling Jacob, go and feign to be your brother. I will give you a coat so that Isaac in his blindness will feel you and think you're Esau. I will cook the food so that he will think you have returned from the hunt. She is training him to be deceptive. I have an evangelist friend who has a principal in a high school who's one of the members of his board. And the principal said to my friend one day that they had a problem in their school with a young boy who was constantly stealing. And so they decided to send for this boy's father. And when the father came, the principal said, look, I want to tell you it's small now, but there are signs it'll become big. Your boy is really becoming a thief. And the father said, what kinds of things is he stealing? He says he's doing it constantly, sir. He's stealing papers, he's stealing pens, he's stealing stationery, he's stealing things from the office, or generally pens, pencils, papers, folders and all. And the father looked chagrined and said, I don't know why he would do that. I could bring him all the pens and pencils and papers from my place of work. Why would he steal it? And as soon as he said that, he convicted himself and said, I know why my boy is growing up to be just like me. Let me ask you, what are your children seeing in you? Are they seeing in you a life of honesty? Are they seeing in you a life of faithfulness? A life of integrity? And pardon me for using the second person. I apply it to myself. I never ever get to a pulpit on a sermon without raising the very questions to myself because I'm so aware, being a preacher, how much more important it is to toe the line and make sure you are not sending clouded signals or confusing signals to them. Ladies and gentlemen, it is almost predictable that a young man raised in a home where his love was mangled, a young man raised in a home with limited communication, a young man raised in a home with deceptive techniques to get ahead, it is predictable that this man is going to be running for the most of his life because he's going to have to flee from those whom he's deceived. He's going to have to run somewhere to learn the truth. He's going to have to go somewhere to find acceptance and affection. And that's what happened to Jacob.
That's a tough lesson to learn. Are you living the kind of life you want your children to emulate? Stay with us. Ravi will be right back with Just a Thought. If you'd like to purchase a copy of today's message in its entirety, call us at 1-800-448-6766 and ask for Raised to Run. You can also order online at rzim.org.
This is Just a Thought with Ravi Zacharias.
You cannot worship him without you costing your own comfort zone, taking away from your own comfort, be it in the giving of your substance, or of your energy, or of your talent, or of your time. You know, the image in the world, what it is? If you're really smart, you should become a rocket scientist. If you're not that smart but still smart, you could become a lawyer or a doctor or something. And if you really are good for nothing up here, you might want to consider the ministry. Somebody wrote this: there was a young student at Trinity who had cracked the square root of infinity, but to work with the digits caused him such fidgets that he chucked math and took up divinity. That's what we think.
Helping the believer think and the thinker believe. For more information, go to rzim.org.
We're pleased to announce that Ravi now has his very own Roku channel. You can watch Ravi's television program, also called Let My People Think, check out a variety of videos on evangelism and apologetics, and hear our radio program there as well. If you have a Roku box, go to the Religion and Spirituality section and search for RZIM. You can also find our videos on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Our mailing address is RZIM, Post Office Box 921939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010. And of course, you can always call us at 1-800-448-6766. Next week, Ravi concludes his message, Raised to Run. I hope you can join us. Let My People Think is a listener-supported radio ministry and is furnished by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.